Hello, welcome back to this video series on the Arturia Moog Modular, and today we are talking about key follow, an esoteric subject, not one of the more popular areas of modular synthesis, but actually very powerful. So what does key follow do? If I can explain it with the use of a technique that, or a feature that you're probably more familiar with, which is velocity. When you hit a key very quietly on a keyboard, you get a very soft note, very quiet note. And when you hit the key hard, you get a very loud note. And there's a range all the way from the softest note to the loudest note. Take that concept, and instead of thinking about it in terms of how hard you're hitting the note, translate it into what pitch you're playing the note at. Now, it's slightly different from velocity in that key follow has a center note around that's basically an axis, and you apply a slope, a key follow slope around this axis. So let me show you in practice. I've got this arpeggio. Okay, and at the moment there's no key follow applied to it at all. So wherever I play it on the keyboard, if you take into account the fact that you have low notes in the low regions and high notes in the high regions, the amount of filter that's being applied to the sound is static across the keyboard. So they all have the same filter being applied to them. Now then, let's introduce key follow. And we're going to use key follow 2. So here's the key follow section. There are 4 independent key follow controls, all of which do the same job. They apply this sloped graph of modulation effect to something else in the synthesizer. Now, key follow 1, just as a matter of interest, is almost always assigned by default to all of your oscillators. You might not have even noticed, but in each of the oscillator driver sections, they're all mapped to key 1. That's how you get different notes on the keyboard. That when the key follow is set to 1 and K1 is mapped to your oscillator, that's how the modular synthesizer knows to play different notes at different ranges of octaves. I'll show you that in practice. I've got this arpeggio sound, but don't worry about that. That's a C. There's a C an octave below, and there's a C an octave below again. If I take this K1 off, so we've got no key follow now. I've just pressed, that's C3, C2, C1, C4, C5, C6. It's the key follow that's actually allowing the modular synthesizer to track in jumps of octaves. When key follow is set to 1 octave of span on the keyboard equals 1 octave in pitch terms when you map it to an oscillator. Okay. So K1's in use, so I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to leave it alone. That's already doing a job. K2 is currently assigned to nothing. It's not doing anything at all. Let's make it do something. And there are 2 ways we can do it. The first way we can do it is by hardwiring key follow 2 into this low pass filter. We do it with this slidey control down here, this little box. You pick the box up, drag up, and you see you have the option to choose each one of the key follows. So we're going to choose K2, and I'll play a C3 on the keyboard. Still sounds exactly the same. You're not going to hear any difference in tone because C3 is the center point around which this modulation effect is going to rotate or pivot. I can prove that by changing this knob, and we get no difference to the tone. Doesn't do anything. Okay, that's only true for C3. Every other note on the keyboard is going to be affected by this routing that we've just plumbed key follow 2 into that filter. I'm going to start playing a G2, and then we'll tweak some of the settings so that we can hear this change happening. We'll get there organically. So, hear that? Hear that? Let's just stop and take stock. What's going on here? When we turn the knob all the way down, we're hearing high frequencies. When we turn the knob all the way up, we're not hearing those high frequencies. Why? Okay, let's have a think about it. When the knob's turned all the way down, the key follow is basically off. The line, remember we've got this pivot, this seesaw, the line is horizontal, which means at 0 there is no key follow. Every note on the keyboard always sounds the same as if there's no key follow at all. I'll play a very low note. Then I'll take the key follow off. It's exactly the same. So every note on the keyboard is unaffected by key follow, because the amount of change that we're applying to the thing that we're plugging our key follow into is 0. Okay? Every value other than 0, we start to make this line get steeper and steeper and steeper. So back to our G2. We're losing the high frequencies. We've lost all those high frequencies. Why? Because our line is now like this. We're playing a note lower than C3, so we're now under the line, which means that, draw a little triangle, we've thrown some frequency away. We have a diagram. Here we are. This is our center point. This is our line. And as we turn that slope knob, that line gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And all of the notes below the pivot point are now being attenuated in some respect. The modulation effect that's being thrown out by K2 into this filter is saying take frequencies away. Every note that's higher than the C3 has the opposite effect. It's saying add extra frequencies. Let's see that in action. So get back down to 0 again. So now I'll play G3. And again, that is the same as that. Okay. Now we're going to add extra frequencies on top of this sound. You'll hear it get brighter. Okay. And the further up the keyboard, further up or down, the further away from our center point, the more dramatic effect is going to be applied. Now, don't forget that there's a fundamental limit to the amount of change that any individual component is going to have. So if I turn this knob all the way up to the maximum, which it currently is, and play a high note, so this is C5. There's no discernible difference. Because that far away from the center, all the frequency has already been let through. There's no further change that this filter can have because it's already having no effect. Don't forget, a filter takes stuff away. So if you're not taking anything away, there's no more that you can do. You can't like take more than everything away. Less than nothing. You can't take less than nothing away. Okay, let's talk about threshold now. This is another setting that basically overrides the slope. So we already talked about the slope having no effect at the key center and then an increasingly dramatic effect, positive and negative, on the key follow slope. Imagine a flat line, which is threshold, and at the lowest note, C-2, it has no effect. And as we start raising this threshold, when it gets to the point where it intersects the slope, it overrides the slope and is actually the most significant of the two effects. So if I play a C2 on the keyboard with no threshold enabled, and we have some slope here, we've got a ratio of 1 on the key follow slope, so we're having an effect on the sound. Now I start to raise the threshold. There. Sharper and sharper and sharper until that's as much high frequency as this particular sound can let through. That's basically the filter is having no effect at this point. So its frequency threshold has basically been turned up all the way. If I turn key 2 off, that's what it sounds like. So it can't get any brighter than that. That's the fundamental sound with no filter being applied to it. Let's get back to K2 again. And then as we reduce the threshold, threshold is overriding the key shift less and less and less until finally it's having no effect at all. As the threshold comes up between C2 and C3, which is where the slope is being applied, we're cutting more and more of that key follow effect out. So and then from that point onwards, we're actually increasing the frequency of the filter. We're now in positive territory. We're overriding the slope completely, and it's as if we're turning the frequency knob on the filter that we're sending our signal to. We're no longer reducing it, which was what we're supposed to be doing if we're below the key shift point. We're now increasing it, and that's as bright as that sound can get. So that's threshold. Then we've got low and high. What are these? These are something completely different. These are triggers. These allow you to fire triggers. So let's figure out how we can do this. For this, I'm going to choose a nice simple sound. Okay. And we've already got a filter in it. Let's apply an envelope to this filter. Okay. So that's the filter. I've set the attack to 1 second. Every time the filter, the envelope fires, it has that effect on the tone. Now then, what if we have that envelope fire off something other than the key being pressed? What happens if it's triggered off key follow? Now then, that envelope is no longer firing. I'm playing C3 and I'm not getting any sound. What happens when I play a C sharp 3? Nothing. D, E. So D3, no note. D sharp 3, no sound. E sharp 3, sorry, E3. We get the sound. Why? Because this envelope is only firing in response to the keyboard follow trigger 2, and key follow trigger 2 is set to exactly and only E3. If I make this range bigger, so make that up to B3, so now if I play a D3, no note, D sharp 3, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B. So only this range of notes is causing this trigger to fire. Now it just so happens that this note we've defined is forbidding any sound at all. I'm playing a D now because the frequency is at 0, but it doesn't need to be. So now, now because I've set my low pass filter frequency to something other than 0, the filter's still not, the envelope's still not firing, but tone is still getting out of the machine. So if I play the D, now if I play the E, that's where we get the filter effect. So you can set up those different ranges of sounds. So yeah, these low and high are not the range over which the key follow is applied. That confused me for the longest time. They are specifically for triggers, and all of these little things, all these things with the little black buttons on, they're the things that can take different triggers from different sources, and typically they're all set to keyboard trigger on, because when you play a note on a keyboard you want something to happen. That doesn't have to be the case. You can define your own custom ranges of triggers using these key follows. Okay, finally, pitch bend and portamento. Very quick on these because it's pretty straightforward stuff. So if I plumb key follow 2 into this low pass filter, and you can hear as I raise the pitch bend wheel, it's applying a filter change to the sound according to the key follow. That was a C4 I just played. Turn the pitch bend off. That's with no filter change being applied. Okay, and you can invert it. So it basically pulls the filter down. Turn that one off. With glide, so we've got legato on, which means that I'm going to play one note, play another note, hold it down, and it'll glide up. We're listening to the tone here, not the pitch. So it's applying a filter sweep over the course of that glide. Okay, it's like the filter knob is being turned as the note glides. If I turn it off, it applies the entirety of the filter in one go. The note is still gliding, but the filter isn't. So the key follow is still being applied to the filter bank, don't forget, because it's still plugged in here. So because that note is so far away, that was a C2 up to a C5 I just played. So because of that range of notes that's being played, there is the key follow effect being applied. So we need the filter sound, but it's no longer gliding, it's just jumping straight there. And then the note is rising up in the background. Glissando is a portamento effect that's not continuous, so it's jumping up in individual semitones. It's like doing a run up on the scale. And back to portamento again, which is the smooth one. So that's it. It's a pretty epic little module for that tiny little rectangle of these seemingly unfathomable controls. You've got a hell of a lot of control over the synth, and it's this ability to change the shape of that modulation slope and apply that slope to any effect that you want. This entire tutorial has been based on one low pass filter, and it's nearly melted my brain trying to get that concept across to you. But now lift that entire template and you can apply it to any modulation enabled input on the synth, and you're going to get the same kinds of controls in terms of control voltages and different rates of those effects that can be applied, centered around this axis note. That's the clincher. And then don't forget the threshold, where you can override all of these effects by bringing this slope up as well. Very complex, very intricate, and definitely worth more investigation than I've given it in the past. Doing this series of tutorials has really opened my eyes to how powerful key follow is, and I definitely intend to make more of an effort to use it more myself in the future. So, wow, I need a cup of tea. That was a heavy one. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you when I've had a long rest. Bye.